Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Um, we just want you to look at the chat box to see what we've typed in, and we'll be starting in a few minutes. The chat box is located right on the right side of your screen. Can everyone see that? You can respond in the chat box by just typing in. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, What's in Your Child's IEP Document. My name is Norma Francallo, and my co-presenter is Denise Reckham.
Hi, everyone.
So just a few housekeeping items. We just want to make sure that all of you have downloaded your handouts. They're located on the right-hand side of the screen. We have 4 handouts for you, which is the PowerPoint and a sample IEP and 2 other additional documents. So you can download that anytime during our presentation. Please note that there is a chat box where you can share information there with the rest of the attendees. There's also a question section where you can post your question, and we will respond to those questions during the Q&A period, which is the last 15 minutes of our presentation. Any unanswered questions will then be answered by Denise and myself, and you'll receive it via email in a few days. Please note that the webinar is being taped for the benefit of those who registered and cannot attend the live webinar. So please refrain from using any kind of personal information about yourself or your child or your school district, and just post general questions. So we are going to launch 2 polls just to get a sense of who's in our audience today. So I'm going to do that now. Okay, so please answer. We're halfway through the vote. Okay, I'm going to close that question. Okay, Denise, do you see the response?
Yeah, so we have 13% elementary school, 50% middle school, 13% high school, and 25% are just joining us to educate themselves on the process.
Okay. Very good. Okay, so one more question before we begin. This is our last question. Okay, I'm going to close the poll because it's 90% answered. Okay, so I see it's 89% of you have IEPs, none of you have 504s, and 11% of you have don't have anything right now. Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to close that. Okay, so we're going to begin our presentation. We're going to go off of the webcam, and we'll return for the Q&A because we want you all just to kind of focus on the PowerPoint slide. So we'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, Denise, you can begin.
Okay, so do you want to go to the next slide?
Sure.
Okay, so, no, back one.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so before we get into the document itself, we wanted to do a brief overview of the Individuals with Disability Education Act, or IDEA. Next slide. The congressional purpose of IDEA is instructive because it really shows why there are IEPs in the first place. What did Congress intend the IDEA to accomplish? And it says that the purpose of the title is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free, appropriate public education, or FAPE, that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. So that's really the purpose of why we're crafting these IEPs, the big picture of it. So next slide. So IDEA's mandate, it's an entitlement. All children with disabilities are entitled to a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. We're going to talk more about least restrictive environment later on in the presentation, but a free, appropriate public education is what the student with the disability requires to receive meaningful educational benefit from their schooling. Next slide. So a child with a disability. Who is a child with a disability? Under the law, a child with a disability has to be in one of the classifications listed. These classifications you'll find on the first page of your IEP, and they are, some of them are broader than others, but they're really saying what the child's disability is that's entitling them to the IEP. I do want to point out, I like to point out the category of emotionally disturbed, because we find very often that families are not aware that children with emotional disabilities, such as depression, anxiety, oppositional defiant disorder, school refusal, those are classifications under education law, just like specific learning disability, autism, and those children, if their disabilities are impacting their education, and if they require special education, which in the case for a child with an emotional disturbance would be therapeutic supports and services, that those children are also covered under education law and may be entitled to an IEP. Next slide. So where do we start? The school is required to evaluate children that may have a disability in all areas of suspected weakness. The evaluation is the starting point. Depending on what the evaluation says, we'll answer the question, first of all, whether the child requires an IEP, and if so, what should be in the IEP. It's very, very important, this step, to getting a good evaluation or set of evaluations so that the IEP team and the family and the child, if they're old enough, understand the disability and what the needs are. Generally, the parents will request that the child be evaluated, and the school district will do the first set of evaluations. We want to mention that if the parents do not think these evaluations are appropriate or complete, the parents can request independent evaluations at the school district's expense. The request should be made in writing. And if the school does not want to do the request, they actually have to file for due process to defend their evaluations. So development of the IEP. So the IEP itself is really a roadmap to your child's education. It's your child's own personal curriculum that is in addition to the general education curriculum in order to address the needs of the child because of the disability. In broad strokes, and we're going to be going over this in more detail during the presentation, the IEP contains the child's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. Where is the child today? When we start this IEP, what are the levels, the baseline data for the child? Then measurable annual goals and short-term objectives. What do we want the child to learn via this IEP? What are the expectations? And the goals and objectives need to be measurable so everybody knows whether the child is actually making progress. Starting at 14, there should be transition goals and services included in the IEP. Then there's, of course, the placement determination. Where is the student going to be getting their education, and any deviation from the least restrictive environment, which, as I said before, we will be going over in more detail while we're going through the IEP document itself. Related services. Can you go back one second? Okay. Related services, including speech language, OT, PT, transportation, and then accommodations and modifications. Those are things that would be in a 504 plan if the child didn't have an IEP. They're non-discrimination accommodations and modifications so that the student with the disability can participate in general education curriculum and extracurricular activities the same as their non-disabled peers. Okay, next slide. Okay, so development of the IEP. The IEP team, so who develops the IEP? Who decides what the services are, what the placement is? Well, the answer is the IEP team, and the parents are an important members of the team in developing the appropriate IEP. It would be inappropriate and actually contrary to the law for the school district to bring an IEP to the parents that was developed without the parents and just the team. That's not to say that they can't come with a draft with what they think may be appropriate for the child, but the IEP meeting itself has to go over all of what they're recommending and has to include what the parents feel is appropriate as well. The child, where appropriate, can and should be part of the team. There's the case manager, at least one of the child's general education teachers, at least one member of the child's study team that evaluated the child, and preferably all evaluators if they're available so that the parents can ask questions of those individuals. Certified school personnel if they referred the child, any other specialists like PT, OT providers, and any other individuals can be invited by the school or the parent who have knowledge of the child and can help the team. So if there's a private therapist working with the child that can make it to the meeting and that has valuable input, the parents are always able to invite those people. Next slide.
All right, thank you, Denise. Okay, so before we go to the actual IEP, I just wanted to kind of go through the steps and understand the steps. First, we must identify the needs of the student, and as Denise said, the needs are identified in the evaluation. Once we have the needs all listed, we can go to the next step and write the goals and objectives that will be included in the IEP. And then we can begin to talk as a team how to, what program would be appropriate for the student, and then finally what placement would be appropriate. So those are the steps. And then looking at focusing on the bigger picture, again, we're identifying needs, we're writing measurable annual goals, and we'll talk about measurable annual goals. We'll describe how progress towards the annual goal will be measured, and we're going to determine as a team how we're going to report progress to the parents so as to make sure that the services are actually working. Okay, so now we're up to the components of the IEP, and so in our handout there is a sample IEP that you can refer to, or if you have your child's IEP, you can follow along as well. So the first page as you can see, is really all the information that is about the child. So make sure that that information is accurate. Then you can see the summary of the special education program and related services. It's a nice sort of cheat sheet to see exactly what your child's program looks like. You can see when under initial eligibility information is when you were referred to the child study team, when you consented to evaluate, when your eligibility was determined, and when you gave consent to implement the actual IEP. You'll also have important information about when your child will be reevaluated by the team, which occurs every 3 years. To the left, you'll see IEP information, seeing if you have a behavior intervention plan, whether there is assistive technology that's been granted to your student, whether you have their supports for the school personnel, all different kind of information. But all of this is on the first page, and it's a nice, again, like a little cheat sheet for you. The next page will have the sign-in sheet, which really just tells you who attended the meeting. So you're not agreeing to the contents of the IEP, you're simply just signing in as a participant. So we have a record of who was there. Okay, so the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, that's a lot of words, but let me just kind of break it down. So it's a statement of your child's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, known as the PLAF. So present levels of academic achievement relate to the core subjects that your child is taking, reading, writing, math, science, social studies. Functional performance, although it's not defined under IDA, it really goes to your child's social competence, their communication ability, their behavior. But the present level, or the PLAF, really is the heart of the IEP because it's information that is taken from your initial evaluation. So it will have baseline data about your child. It'll indicate what areas of needs have been identified, your child's learning deficits, your child's strengths, because we want to know everything. We want to know the deficits, but we also want to know the strengths. But all of this information in this section is going to assist the team, and you being part of that team, to assist in writing goals. So just want to make sure that you read your evaluations very carefully. They can be very tedious, and you may not understand all the lingo and the language and the numbers that you're seeing, but ask questions and highlight and really go through that through all of that, because there's a lot of information there. So we talk about areas of needs, and this is not a complete list, but this is just areas like, again, academic or your intellectual ability, your health concerns, any mental health issues, gross fine motor skills, sensory, social skills, pragmatic language, which has to do with social language skills that we use to interact with each other, executive functioning skills, skills that help us to plan and focus and organize and remember and juggle multiple tasks. And of course we have behaviors. So these are all areas of needs that we need to discuss with the team. You will note on the IEP that there is a section for concerns of parents. And so again, you remember you're a key member of the IEP team, and your observations that you have at home with your child or during their playtime, this is your data that you can share with the IEP team. So you can provide the team with your concerns prior to meeting for the IEP meeting, or as you'll know, and some of you have experienced it, while you're at an IEP meeting, you will come up with other concerns, or maybe, and so you'll revise and you can update your concerns and hand in that to your case manager, so they can include that in the IEP and or attach it to the IEP. So transition planning, that's another area that I think a lot of parents because especially if you have children who are really young, you're not even thinking about transitioning. And transition is, when you're dealing with a student going from school, a K through 12 program, to a post-school activity. And post-school activities are like your post-secondary education, which could be a 2-year or 4-year college, or a vocational education. It could be work, it could be adult services, it could be independent living, it could be a number of different things. And every child is unique, and therefore, the statement under transition planning is going to focus on the course of study that this student is going to follow so they can achieve their post-school goals. And typically, this planning starts by law at the age of 14 or younger, and I bolded or younger, because again, every child is different, and so how they attain certain skills is very different from one other child. Maybe a child can attain certain skills in a year's time. Some may take 5 years to attain that particular skill. So there is, you're always thinking about that, and that we usually find that parents typically don't really think about that, and that's okay. But now you know, and so we're looking at even like self-advocacy and self-determination. Like self-advocacy, you're asking for assistance, all right? And self-determination is making decisions on your own. Sounds simple to some of us, but to some students, it's a challenge. Okay, so you have the statement of appropriate measurable post-secondary goals. So these are all the goals that we write into the IEP, and there's an area for that when a child turns 16 or, again, younger. We provided you with a link, which we thought was helpful, that shows some post-secondary goal examples. So you can refer to that at your leisure. So behavioral interventions. We're not only talking about academics, we're also talking about behavior. And if behavior impedes a student's learning or the learning of others in the class, the IEP team must consider behavioral interventions and supports. And typically that is all put into a behavior intervention plan that is first obtained through a functional behavior assessment, or an FBA. That's the assessment that a child's team member would conduct and would get that information and put it into a behavior intervention plan, and that is included in your child's IEP. Behavior interventions are not, simply telling a child, don't do that. That's not an intervention. We need to always provide replacement behavior. Okay, progress monitoring on your IEP. That's usually a very small section, but a very important section, because this is where you will be informed on how your child is doing. And typically this is done 4 times a year. But as a child study team member, all of you can decide whether information should be shared weekly or monthly or bi-monthly. It's not only quarterly, but it all depends on your child. And this is kind of a nice visual as to what progress monitoring looks like. I mean, we can see it in chart form. We can see it in a descriptive paragraph. Depending on how you as a parent can interpret your child's if all that information is something you should discuss with your team, whether you like to see it in a chart form, whether you like to see it, all written out, or, just kind of work with your team, because progress monitoring isn't easy. It's challenging, it's tedious, but it's very important information. So we should all, work together as a team to figure out how we're going to share that information. Okay, so we're moving on to the annual goals that are included in your child's IEP. And when we talk about measurable annual goals, we're talking about a clear way to determine if progress is being made. Okay, and so goals have to say or state exactly what you want to accomplish in a given year. Goals need to match the needs of the student. So if a child is having difficulty in reading and 5 areas have been identified as a need, there should really be 5 goals for that for that student. The goals need to make sense to a reader, and I always tell parents, like, if it doesn't pass the stranger test, like if you give it to your mother-in-law or your husband or friend and say, can you read this? Does this make sense to you? And if they can't understand it, then it's not a good goal. We need to know the goals can be measured, and we need to determine where the progress has been made. And we can sometimes, after reviewing an evaluation, see like 30, 40 goals. But are we going to put that all 30, 40 goals in an IEP? We're going to prioritize, and we're going to figure out what this particular child can handle in a year's time. And we don't want to set the bar too low, because we have to close the achievement gap. And 2-4 year achievement gap is really difficult to close. So we thought we'd give a really quick explanation of what the difference between a bad or a good goal. And so let's say there's a child, 2nd grade, who's an area of need has been identified as reading comprehension. So the goal that was initially given was stated, when given grade level text, Mary will demonstrate understanding of the text. Okay, so when you look at that, doesn't pass the stranger test, because I'm already wondering, well, what do they mean by grade level text? What is that? And how does Mary demonstrate, and what is she demonstrating? Where are the details? How is she going to demonstrate understanding of the text? Like, understanding of the text to me is not measurable here. So here is an example of what a good goal can be like. So after independently reading a narrative passage, so now we're given information as to what that text is. At her independent reading level, A, at the end of kindergarten, Mary will by the end of the school year, read at level C. So here we have where she's starting and where we hope she will end up at the end of the school year. Mary will independently identify 5 of the 6 story elements. So here we're given more detail as to what she's demonstrating as to her understanding. And we are also given information as to, like, how often are we going to check this? It's going to be 4 consecutive weekly probes at 80% accuracy. And we're also now given, what tool are we going to use to measure this? And a rubric tool is typically what teachers use, and it's a great tool. Okay, so modifications and supplementary aids and services, that's another big section of the IEP. When we talk about modifications, we're talking about, like, changing the curriculum in some way, so based on a child's disability. So let's say we have an assignment that can be reduced, that's a little bit more manageable. That's a modification. An accommodation is like we're altering the environment for that child. So, but it doesn't mean that we're altering the what is being taught. So that could mean a sign language interpreter for someone who is deaf. That could mean text-to-speech software. That could also mean extended time. In addition to modifications and accommodations, there are supplemental aids that we can use, or if a child is found to be in need of it. It could be an FM system. It could be some type of adaptive equipment. We can, if a child needs a one-to-one aid, that would be listed, and audiobooks. And these are just examples. And also in the IEP, there is a section that addresses supports for school personnel. So there's not only training for school personnel, but for staff and students and parents. So let's say a teacher and staff are going to be collecting discrete data for a student, and they need training on that. That should be listed in the IEP. For parent, the parent training can also be listed. Let's say we're involved in teaching some behavioral interventions in school. A parent should know how to reinforce all of that at home to have a better result. Student training, it can also be included, if a child is going to be using some type of assistive technology, we simply just don't give that technology to a student and say, here you go. There's training, there's learning curve involved, and so it could be training for the student, the parent, as well as the teacher. Okay, so then we come to the statement of special education programming and related services, and this is simply, again, what you saw at the first page of your IEP. It's just a list of the students, some classes and programs and related services, and when they're getting it, how many days a week, how much time, and so forth. And this is a time for you to really spend having your team explain and define each program for your child, because there's a lot of language and lingo here that is not seen every day, like an in-class support or pull out resource room, things like that. So just be clear on what the program looks like and have them explain it to you. Okay, extended school year, that is also in the IEP, and that's something that every child who has a learning disability or a disability needs to be considered for, but are not entitled. The team has to determine whether they are eligible for that. There is a really great policy letter given out by the New Jersey Department of Education. It's dated May 24th, 1999, but it's still really good, and it's a 4-page document. It's a great thing to have when you're at an IEP meeting and it's time to talk about extended school year. It goes through the criteria and all the different factors that a team should really be looking at. And it's just a helpful handout for you. So that's in your download area. So placement decisions, this is also in your IEP, and it's where the team will explain in writing the rationale for removing a child from general ed, placing a child in a self-contained class. So anything that is brought to the table, and the child team will have to consider it, and we'll say yay or nay to it, and we'll explain the reasons why they say yes and the reasons why they say no. So that is a section where you really need to spend some time to make sure that all that was explained and spoken about or talked about at the IEP meeting is all in there. So when we talk about placement, you hear the term least restrictive environment. And so what does that mean? That refers to the setting where a child with a disability can receive an appropriate education that's designed to meet, their needs alongside peers without disabilities. And the issue is, where can the student make progress? And we always start in general education with supports, and we work from there. And this is a really good visual for you to look at, because there are a lot of different options and things that the team and you yourself have to really think about. Where will my child make progress, and what it could be. It could be in general ed, it could be in class, it could be in a self-contained class, it could be in private schools, a hospital, home instruction. There's so many different options. So, modifications and extracurricular activities. This is an opportunity for students with disabilities to participate in these activities with their non-disabled students. So it's, for example, it's sports, it's chess club, it's special interest clubs, music program or band. We should talk, as a team about whether, there may be a need to modify certain things in those programs. Our students participate in district-wide and statewide assessment programs, and we all know about the park, and there are state assessments, and they're in this section. The team will list all the accommodations and the settings that this child will be getting. So we want to be clear what is available for your child, so that your child is aware of what their accommodations and what their setting is going to be like once that test is administered. Okay, graduation requirements. Since the park was instituted, this document has changed so many times. I'm not really clear myself what the graduation requirements are, but this document is the most up-to-date one, so we figured we might as well provide you a copy with that. You can get that out of your handout section. It's issued by the New Jersey Department of Education. So if you have any questions about that, definitely reach out to your child's guidance counselor or principal to just get clarification. Okay, well, Denise is going to take it off from here.
Okay, so the next section discusses transfer of rights at the age of majority. So when children reach the age of 18, they are emancipated and become adults, and the parents are no longer their legal guardian and can no longer make decisions on their behalf. This is not only true for education, but also for medical decision-making, financial decision-making. So the IEP is notifying the parent and the child that when the child turns 18, the child is now the decision maker. The child would attend the IEP meeting, sign the IEP, allow the parents to participate or not allow the parents to participate. So if the student is going to need the parent to continue in the guardian role, you want to start thinking about that, 3 to 6 months, say, before the 18th birthday, and look at pursuing guardianship. It is something you have to go to court for. It doesn't just happen. It doesn't matter what the child's disability or needs are. It's still something that has to be, you have to go before a judge to get guardianship of the child once they turn 18 in order to continue making those those decisions. That the child can sign powers of attorney or permit the parents to be involved if they have the competency to do so. Next slide. Okay, so whenever a district proposes any action regarding the identification, classification, evaluation, placement of a student, they are required to give prior written notice before they make those changes. The way that generally looks like is in the IEP itself. So you go to the IEP meeting, the team discusses changes to the IEP, and they either they should provide you with actually the notice of what their intentions are at the IEP meeting. Sometimes they give you a draft, and then they provide you with the final notice, which is the final IEP. At a later date, if there was a lot of handwriting on it, sometimes they clean it up and send it to you later. You want to go to the next slide?
Oops.
Okay, so once you get that written notice or that final IEP, unless it's the first IEP, which must be signed by the parents to go into effect, unless it's the first IEP, so if it's any other IEP, the second, third, and so on, it will go into effect without you signing it and over your disagreement 15 days after you receive that final IEP document. Now, if the parent is not happy with the IEP, they don't believe it provides the child appropriate services, they can file for mediation and due process with the Department of Education within those 15 days and invoke what's called stay put, which means that the prior IEP, the one that the child had before it was trying to be changed, stays in effect while you're in due process, which can be a trial, and even through any appeal of a decision by an Office of Administrative Law judge. If you do not like the IEP you have, and you go to an IEP meeting and now you get a new IEP and you don't like that one either, you don't necessarily have to file for due process within those 15 days because you're not trying to protect the former IEP because you didn't believe that one provided any the right services either. So, you know, that's just something to be aware of. A lot of times the child study team will say, okay, here's the new IEP, and if you don't sign it, or if you don't file for due process, it's going to go in effect in 15 days, which is true. But when that really needs to be, handled on that expedited basis is when you're trying to protect the old IEP. Once you file for due process, the first step is either a resolution conference or mediation with the Department of Education. If it does not settle, the matter gets transmitted to the Office of Administrative Law, and you go to a settlement conference in front of a judge. If the matter doesn't settle there, another administrative law judge will conduct a due process hearing and render a result. Again, if you filed within 15 days, all of this time that's going on has made the old IEP stay put. If stay put wasn't an issue, if you're just filing because of general disagreement, then that's fine also. You don't want to sign the IEP if you don't agree with it, but you don't necessarily have to run to court unless you need to protect the old IEP. Next slide. Okay, so, we've gone through the major components of the IEP. We just want to mention, a little bit about implementation of the IEP because we spend, sometimes hours at the IEP meeting crafting, a very good and comprehensive IEP. And then the parent comes to back to school night and finds out the teacher wasn't even aware there was an IEP, or if they were aware, they're not so sure what's in it. You want to, and this is not to say anything about, against teachers. They may have 10 kids with IEPs with all sorts of different accommodations and modifications in their classroom, and it's, could be hard to keep track of, who gets what modification. It's always a good practice to reach out to your child's teacher at the beginning of the year, tell them a little bit about your child and their disability, about the modifications, accommodations, services, and things that your child responds to positively and negatively, and work collaboratively with the teacher. The teacher is there to help the student, and the more the parent can help the teacher help the student, the better it is for the teacher and the student going forward. Next slide. You want to make sure that you receive your progress reports that are outlined in the IEP. You want to make sure that you review those progress reports and make sure that the goals are being met. If they're not being met, you can call a meeting. Even though there are, annual IEP meetings that have to happen, you could have as many IEP meetings as you need to make sure the child is getting appropriate services. Develop open communication with your child's teacher and the other individuals at the school. Communicate with the child's study team members. Volunteer at the school. If your child is verbal and old enough and able enough to tell you, more information about the day, ask them questions. Are they receiving the services and modifications that are outlined in the IEP? If not, just talk to the school. Ask them if there are problems with following the IEP and what can be done about those problems. Really crafting the appropriate IEP is the beginning of the process, and staying on top of that is really important. Next slide. Understanding your child's abilities and disabilities. It's, sometimes we are focusing on the IEP, we're focusing on all the things the child can't do and needs help on, and it's really, really important to step back and look at the things that the child excels at and try to find ways to make sure that they feel that success and that they're supported in that way so that it balances out all the hard work that they're going to have to do with the areas that they struggle. Understand your child's diagnosis and disability. Attend lectures, workshops, learn, find local parent advocacy groups, and network with other parents. Find out what worked for their kids. It's really, really important if you're going to be part of the IEP team, if you're going to be an active member, to educate yourself about your child's needs and what can be done so that you can really participate. Next slide. So, these are just some last words of advice. First of all, when we go back to the idea of a free, appropriate public education, that word appropriate has a lot of meaning in the law. The students are not entitled to every service imaginable to meet their needs. To serve them. They're not entitled to the best services. They're entitled to appropriate services that make sure that they make meaningful educational progress, not every bit of progress they could possibly make. It's very difficult sort of to split those apart, because obviously as you're a parent, you want your child to make as much progress as they can. But in the world of special education, you're really trying to discuss, as far as what the school has to provide. And this is not what you're providing extra things on the side, extra activities or services, but the school needs to provide an appropriate level of services for the child to make meaningful educational progress. We don't want to tell the school, well, this is what I was told is the best placement or the best services, because they're not entitled to the best, and you're sort of defining something that your child is now not entitled to. So you want to find out what the appropriate level of service is, the base level for them to make this meaningful progress. Put everything in writing. There's a lot of reasons to do this. The first reason is really that there can be miscommunication, that you speak to the teacher and you think that the teacher agreed with you about doing something for the child, and the teacher may not have had the same understanding. So if you just go, you can have that conversation verbally, but if you write to the teacher, thank you so much for talking with me today. I really appreciate the work you're doing with my child. I just want to make sure that I understand that you're going to now move my son's seat to the front of the room. You're going to give him a chart that has these things on it, whatever it is you discussed. And the first reason of that is that then the teacher will receive that, and either they agree, yes, that's what they're going to do, or they get back to you and say, that wasn't my understanding. I understood that I was going to do this and this. And then you have a chance to, right up front, before there's frustrations, to really clarify what's going to happen. The other thing is that it creates a paper trail of what's been tried, what works and what doesn't work with the child, that can be used by the IEP team in crafting further IEPs. The last thing is just, no matter how frustrating it may be, it's really, really important to maintain a pleasant and cooperative and respectful manner when dealing with your child's school. Try to remember that even if you're frustrated, or even if you feel that your child's not getting what your child should be getting, the people there have gone to school and studied and want to be teachers and speech and language pathologists and want to work and help children. They are not there to hurt your child. And when you go in with a more combative atmosphere, people just get their backs up and they start wanting to defend themselves and their professionalism, and it really becomes less about the child, which should be the focus, and more about their how they do their job. So try to, I'm not saying that it's not okay to get upset, and we are both, Norm and I, parents as well, and it's very natural to be upset and worried and scared and frustrated with things that happen with your child, but it doesn't help you advocate for your child to sort of put that out there to the school. So I think that's it. We're going to actually turn to the question box.
Yeah, we have one question. If students agree to give parent consent, do we still need the court procedure prior to the child turning 18 years of age?
Okay, so I'll take that one.
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, you don't get it prior to, you get it on the 18th birthday or thereafter. Prior to the 18th birthday, you are the guardian, and you are the one who does make the decisions. If the child is competent to consent to your participation, then that is fine. They can give you permission. If not, however, then it doesn't work, because if the child is, say, nonverbal or low IQ, can't understand what they're signing, you're putting a piece of paper in front of them saying whatever it says and they would sign it anyway, then that's not going to be sufficient, because they don't understand that they're giving you that power. That's a prerequisite. If they can understand, then they can give you power of attorney, they can give you the rights to act on their behalf. If they can't understand, then you need to get guardianship. And really, not just for the school, really most importantly for medical decisions, because if you bring a child to the doctor, the emergency room, and they're over 18, they can't consent to a surgery if the doctor sees that they don't understand the risks. So guardianship is something that you really need to look into, depending on the level of competency of the child. We have also one more.
We have another question. Yeah. So how does a child qualify for a one-to-one aid, or how do you know? That's a really good question. It really depends on. So let's say you're in a general education classroom and your child has an IEP, no aid, and is having difficulty attending, or they're still struggling to complete assignments or to understand things, or to be, they're having difficulty with behavior. It all depends. And let's say they decide, okay, sometimes there's a shared aid. There's an extra person in the room, and if, let's say, that's still not working, then a one-to-one aid may be warranted, and that's kind of like how it's all kind of trial and error to kind of see like how you want to make sure the child is making progress and has the right amount of support in the classroom. So I hope I answered your question. I'm not sure. Denise, you want to add anything?
I would just add in that all of these decisions need to be backed up by some kind of evidence. So there's another question here also about extended school year. All of the child's needs, whether they need how many speech and language services a week, do they need an Orton-Gillingham program for dyslexia, do they need, anytime you're talking about that, you're talking about things that you need an expert, different experts depending on the question, to really weigh in and support if the district isn't agreeing with you. Now, they may agree with you because they're experts too. They see the child, they're working with the child. They may say, yes, this child regresses over the summer, needs ESY. We are going to put in ESY. But if there are things that you believe your child needs and the district does not believe your child needs, the way to move forward with the district, and this is true for people that hire an attorney or don't hire an attorney, we need the evidence. It's not what an attorney says. It's not what the parent says. It's really what an expert in the field says is needed for the student to make progress. I'll just quickly go. The ESY question was also whether or not if the student doesn't make enough progress during the year, if you can insist on extended school year. So you would be sort of talking about a compensatory education system. If, let's say, the IEP team does not believe that the child is going to regress over the summer and doesn't need extended school year for that respect, but now the parent is saying, well, but I don't think they learned enough during the year. They didn't meet their goals and objectives, and they didn't get enough education. So you're really asking for the ESY program to be compensatory, to make up for a shortfall in the school year, and that is something you can ask for. If you have evidence that the child didn't make meaningful progress, then the child may be entitled to compensatory services, and certainly those services can happen over the summer. Want to read another one?
The other one, just calling an additional IEP meeting change the annual IEP meeting date.
It doesn't have to. I think that's something the team can decide themselves. If you feel that now that you've met and it's, say, 3 months before when the annual meeting would be, and the team says, well, we don't think we're going to have to meet in 3 months, let's just make this, you know, if you're, it depends what you're talking about at the meeting. Are you talking about what next year's IEP is going to be, or are you just changing the goals or adding a service? And, you know, I think that would be a decision of the team. If you're meeting because you want to add another speech and language, or you want to talk about changing something that's not working, and you're not talking about the next year's IEP, then it shouldn't change that, and you should still meet for the annual review to talk about the next year's program.
Right. On the first page, classification parts, should school capture all of his medical diagnosis? That's a really good question. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. Not always. It's usually in the PLAF, the present levels of performance. It's kind of, you know, it would be nice if it was, you know, because you know the IEP is being shared with your teachers, so it would be nice if it was right there, so they don't have to dig into the present levels. But it's not required that it be on that first page.
They can't always do it with their programs.
With their program, yeah.
Has to pick one, and the category is really most important for when the state gets audited. They have to show that all the children that got IEPs were in a category under the law. So it doesn't, the category should be the most pressing one, I guess. Just, you know, and sometimes you see schools use multiply disabled as the category, and then it'll say underneath that the multiple disability is based on autism, ADHD, you know, and a specific learning disability, or whatever the student's categories are.
Okay. Is that acceptable practice that under progress report, school wrote 4 written progress report during the school year? Do more details are really needed. Again, typically it's 4 times a year, but again, it's a discussion that you should have with the team, depending on the severity or the gap, the academic gap of the child, and wanting to see whether, you know, a program is going to work or not. We don't want to wait, you know, if we institute it in September and we wait until December or January to get the progress report. Maybe we want to have progress reports maybe once or twice a month. It's we just want you to know that there are options available. It's not just 4 times a year.
It's also, I think she's asking also what would the progress reporting look like, and I think generally it's the goals and objectives. So generally they take the goals and objectives and they fill them out with where the child is on meeting those goals. That's why, first of all, you want the goals and objectives to be as specific and measurable as possible. If it's different for different disabilities, so you could put in there that the progress reporting for a student with dyslexia is going to include exactly where they are in the reading program that's being provided, you know, what level they're on, what book they're on. For a child with autism, that can often, you know, be reporting on the programs that are being taught and graphs of where they are in the program. So if it says there's how many times a year you're going to get it, so there's the frequency, and then there's what it's going to look like. And if it doesn't say anything different, then what it's going to look like is your goals and objectives section with, you know, progressing gradually, progressing satisfactorily, mastered, independent, this kind of thing. It depends on the disability and whether or not that's going to be enough information for you. And if it's not, you certainly can add other progress monitoring requirements there.
Okay, let's see. We have, how many more minutes do we have? Just want to make sure we can get 3 more minutes.
5 minutes. Here's another one. Is there a difference between an aide and in-class support or another teacher? Also, is the IEP more global than the 504 in Ken, or should you have both? So the IEP includes things that would be in a 504, so you don't have both. The modifications and accommodations section in the IEP are what would be in a 504. Those are the anti-discrimination accommodations that the child is receiving to level the playing field. And that's what a 504 plan would provide. So you wouldn't not have both. And in-class support is really generally, and again, Norma mentioned this earlier, but it's really important to ask your specific child study team in your district how they're using these terms, because not all the districts use them the same. Generally, in-class support is a general ed teacher and a certified special education teacher co-teaching the classroom. An aid is an aid, either a personal aid or a shared aid is a generally, and doesn't have to be a teacher, and is someone to help the child, pay attention, manage their stuff, should not be teaching the student, is just there to assist the student. It's more of an accommodation than a teaching method. Do you want to add anything, Norma? Or?
No, it's true. There are how it's described in the IEP between an aid or sometimes you see a shared aid or you have to get that all cleared up at the IEP meeting so you understand exactly what you're getting and what that aid is going to do for your child while they're in that classroom.
Here's another one. Can a dyslexic student, after being reevaluated, test out of special education services under an IEP? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. If the classification, the one classification that most often people test out of is specific learning disability, because that one classification requires a certain discrepancy between the child's IQ and achievement. So a student with dyslexia who has been remediated may close that gap, hopefully, closes that gap, and may test out of the discrepancy. Now, if the student also has ADHD, anxiety, some other disability, they may be able to stay classified in a different classification. But yes, you can test out of the specific learning disability classification. And that doesn't mean that you wouldn't get any more accommodations, but it may be that you only need accommodations and not special education anymore. And you could get
and typically you can get a you can get a 504 to give you extra time. Just other really it's more, sometimes it could be definitely more than extra time, but you can the whole idea of special education is that we don't stay with an IEP, but that we grow and we improve and we make progress from year to year. And so we want to see that progression from an IEP to a 504 to so that's a good thing.
There are two more questions. We're running a little over, so if people are need to go, but I don't mind. We can stay a couple more minutes here and answer the last few questions. Is there an exception for students with IEPs for the second language requirement for high school graduation? So in general, there can be an exception of just about anything if it's required by the disability, if the IEP team believes it's necessary for high school graduation. So there are students that are accepted out of 4 years of English, that are accepted out of foreign language requirement, out of gym even, if it's necessary, if it's in the IEP. So that means that there's that section for graduation requirements, and then it's asking, is this child accepted out of anything? And if they need to be based on the disability, and if the team believes that they need to be, then they can be accepted from that and still receive a diploma. There was one more up here. Could you please address the topic of parent training, for example, on assistive technology, generalization skills to home behavior plan, implementation, etc.? So these are, again, these are issues that that need to be in the IEP. That if the child, there are children that have home programs, it's in the IEP that someone comes to the home and teaches them how to brush their teeth, how to do daily living skills in the home. There's certainly parent training in IEPs, especially for kids with autism, that parent needs to learn how to work with the child, in a similar way that's happening at the school. All of these things, if it's a need, that's something you need to talk to the team about in the IEP meeting, and certainly it needs to be in the IEP. if your child needs something, including your child needs you to learn something as the parent, it needs to be in the IEP. The IEP is a contract between the school and the parent on what services are going to be provided to the student. The IEP is what the district, what the school is saying is free, appropriate public education for the child. So at the minimum, they need to give the student what's in the IEP. If there's speech and language services in the IEP and the speech and language provider is out sick for 4 weeks, I mean, that happens, it's okay, but they need to make up the speech because the IEP team decided that the student needed twice a week speech, and they've now not had 8 sessions. So they need to figure out a way to make up the 8 sessions so that the student gets the services that they needed. So you want to just make sure that anything you feel you need for the student to be able to make progress is in the IEP.
Okay, there's a question: if you implement an FBA with only 6 weeks of school left, it's reasons that the IEP goal will not be met, can you argue that more time is needed to meet goals? Goals can be, just because it's the end of the school year doesn't mean that goal ends. We can carry that goal over. Goals are, moved in and out of that section. We create new goals, we keep old goals, but we have to figure out why we haven't met that goal and try and change up the program so that we can see some progress on that particular goal. It's not simply just if we didn't meet anything on that goal and just putting it back in for the following year. We've got to change it up a little bit. We need to look at the program a little bit and see exactly what we were doing.
I think that's all the questions.
Is that it? Is there also, is it true that IEP gives parents more power as far as, did we answer that one?
The IEP
it gives, there is more, there is
some more procedural issues that you get. Right. So the main difference under a 504 and under an IEP, the child is entitled to a free, appropriate public education. The entitlement is the same. There's no stay put in a 504. So if your child has a 504 and then you meet with the committee and they decide, well, next year we don't think your child needs the 504, you still have procedural rights to go to, to court and argue that they're not giving your child the appropriate accommodations and modifications, but there's no stay put where the child keeps the accommodations while you're fighting. So that's one difference. But in order to qualify for an IEP, you need to have a disability. The disability needs to affect how, your ability to receive your education, and you need to require special education. So a child with, for instance, ADHD, and the ADHD may definitely impact their ability to receive their education because of attentional issues. But the question has to be asked whether that student requires any actual direct services to learn certain things, or whether or not they just need accommodation. And sometimes the answer for kids with ADHD is yes, they do need direct services, they need social skills, they need executive functioning help, study skills, and sometimes it's no. They just need to sit in front of the class and to have extra time on testing and other kind of accommodations. So each situation has to be looked at separately, and it's not just that you can pick one document or the other because one is stronger. If your child requires special education in any form, they should have an IEP. And if they don't, they should have a 504 plan.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us. If we have any unanswered questions, again, we're going to answer each question.